But we begin in Syria, where up to 1,000 people have been killed in the last 4 days. Most of those victims were civilians caught in fighting between the nation's new Islamist rulers and loyalists of Syrian deposed President Bashar al-Assad. The risk of upheaval was further highlighted in recent days as clashes between government security forces and gunmen loyal to the Assad regime erupted in the country's coastal region, with scores of people being reportedly killed. The coastal province being the heartland of the Alawite faith, an offshoot of the Shia Islam to which the Assad clan belongs. Both the US and Russia have since asked the UN Security Council to meet behind closed doors this Monday to discuss the worsening violence. Dana Alboz has more from Damascus.
There is a fragile calm is starting to return to the cities of Latakia and Tartus, but people over there are still living in fear after these 4 days, after the worst events that Syria has witnessed since the fall of the regime in last December. Fear is everywhere among the people, as well security forces are still chasing down loyalists to the ousted regime, those groups that are armed as well. During these clashes, many violations and many cases of violence and killings have been reported by NGOs, but it is still very difficult to get accurate numbers and figures as there is no official report on the death toll yet. A lot of fake news as well on social media and on other tools as well as Telegram are being published, and this is increasing the worrying and the fear amongst Syrians that are just going out of 14 years of war. Local groups like Civil Peace just documented the death of over 700 civilians, amongst them a lot of children and women as well. Many of them are from the Alawite community, the same as the former president, but there have also been attacks against security forces. We have seen images of completely burnt cars coming from Idlib. The recent events are increasing worries amongst Syrian and the new authorities and new administration. They are trying to reassure Syrians that they will protect all civilians in the diverse country. The interim president Ahmed al-Shara gave 2 speeches in less than 24 hours. He announced 2 commissions. One is an independent committee to investigate the recent events and to define who is responsible for the latest violations. There is also another committee that was formed which will try to establish the trust with locals in Tartus and Latakia. These acts of violence has been as well wildly condemned on the international level as the new administration is facing major challenges on the security level and as well on the economic level, the economic crisis that are making the life of Syrians worse and hard day after day. Tensions, we can feel it here as well in Damascus. Yesterday there was a gathering in Damascus, but things were very difficult as well, as people are fearing as well a diverse separation in the society, and security forces have had to fire in the air in order to separate the demonstration.
And joining me now from Washington is Dr. Yaron Yellen, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Dr. Yellen, thank you for your time. Firstly, how did this all begin last Thursday?
Well, it all began with an ambush by former regime military and intelligence officials, where 30 people from the new security forces were killed, many later found to be burnt to death or put in shallow graves. And as a consequence, the state asked for a general mobilization of forces, which brought in people from other parts of the country. And that then led to some within the Syrian security forces, as well as these other factions, to be involved in then massacring civilians, amongst them, of course, the Alawites.
Now, as we've seen online, local residents have described scenes of looting and mass killings, as you said there, including that of children. So are Syrian government troops directly implicated?
It's believed that some of them were involved. There are also other factions that have been attempting to join the new Ministry of Defense and military, but it hasn't been successful thus far. And therefore, this illustrates the problem that the new government doesn't have a monopoly on violence in the country, and that there are many factions that still have arms that are able to do things on their own as well.
There have also been claims online that some of those government fighters were from Uzbekistan or Chechen. Is that believed to be the case?
I'm not sure that any of that information is specifically verified. I'm aware that some foreign fighters that had previously been with the government when they were the group Hayat Tahrir Hashem were involved in this attack. But in terms of the specific ethnicities, I'm unsure that there are any particulars that we can define.
In any case, this is a serious test for the interim president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, who's called for peace over the weekend. Does he or his government have the capacity to restore law and order?
I think this will be the biggest test of the transition. In many ways, this could make or break it in terms of its legitimacy and credibility. It already had a bit of a dent during the National Dialogue Conference process, which many felt was not inclusive enough and a bit rushed. And so if this investigative committee that was set up to independently fact find as well as give names to potentially prosecute within the judiciary is not deemed serious or legitimate by the population, it could further undermine the future of this transition.
It's certainly interesting to note that no one in the international community has been pointing the finger directly at al-Sharaa as being responsible for this violence.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe that it was a policy of the government to directly attack or massacre civilians. I think part of it is individuals that were in the field took it on their own hands to do something. And then by the time it was too late, the government then put out a statement that they needed to follow the proper procedures as they had been doing going back to the offensive that led to the overthrow of the Assad regime, which saw no civilians being killed at all.
And this is certainly a sign of a country and its people completely traumatised after 14 years of civil war. So what steps need to be urgently taken by the government to restore confidence among the population that such violence will not be tolerated?
Yeah, I mean, it's important that they begin this transitional justice process as well as setting up truth and reconciliation committees. It's not just the trauma of the last 14 years by the majority of the population, but also the Alawite community. I think it's important to note their own traumas that are more generational, historical in nature, going back to the medieval and Ottoman period when Sunni authorities at the time massacred their communities as well. And so we're dealing with dual traumas going on here. And that's why until there's a serious effort at transitional justice, there's going to continue to be grievances going on.
And at the same time, obviously, lifting of sanctions is key in all of this because money needs to be flowing into that economy. What should the international community be doing at this point in terms of increasing its support for this interim regime?
Like you mentioned, sanctions relief would definitely alleviate a lot of the problems. It's important to note that 90% of the country is in poverty. This is not an issue of one sect, ethnic group, or religious group. This is affecting everybody. 1/3 of the buildings were destroyed during the war, and there's only 1 hour of electricity in Damascus. And so allowing rebuilding money to come in could hopefully alleviate problems and then make it more difficult for outside actors to potentially meddle and recruit people to cause some of these problems, since some of these former regime networks are very much allied with Iran and Hezbollah.
And another country in that mix is Turkey. Turkey warning that these insurgents pose a serious threat to this interim government. So what's your assessment as to their level of involvement?
Well, their continued support for factions of the Syrian National Army also is not very helpful either. A number of them are believed to be some of the key factions that were actually involved in this massacre. The Syrian National Army is the main group that has been fighting in northern Syria against the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is the U.S.-backed group fighting against the Islamic State. And so all outside meddling is not helpful to this transition process, whether it's what the Iranians are doing, whether it's what the Turks are doing, or even if you go into the south with what the Israelis are doing in terms of the bombing, taking over territory, and trying to back different Druze factions.
With that in mind, what are you expecting to come out of the UN Security Council meeting later today?
It's supposed to be a private meeting, so we won't get a full readout of everything that was kind of agreed upon behind the scenes. But it's expected that, what happened will be condemned, and that they'll be looking for, trying to stabilize the situation to make sure that it doesn't return to more violence again.
Dr. Yellen, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your analysis.
Thank you.